The notification popped onto my phone while I was pouring coffee. Cousin Emma added you to Thanksgiving call. I frowned. I'd never heard of that group before. Then the messages started loading. One after another. 52 unread texts. I barely had time to scroll before I saw my father's name. Don't let her find out. My stomach tightened. Someone replied, what if she asks what time dinner is? My sister answered almost immediately. Just give her the wrong time, we'll all be gone before she gets there. Another message appeared. The closing has to happen before dessert. I stopped breathing for a second. Closing. I kept scrolling. No one questioned excluding me. No one defended me. They were planning Thanksgiving around making sure I stayed away. The people I'd spent every Thanksgiving with were calmly discussing how to trick me into missing it. I took screenshots of every message before anyone could delete them. My finger hovered over the keyboard. I could have demanded answers. I could have called my father. Instead, I typed one sentence. Happy Thanksgiving. The closing agent will explain the rest. I hit send. The chat froze. One person left. Then another. Within seconds, my phone exploded with incoming calls. Dad. My sister. 2 aunts. My cousin. I watched the screen light up again and again until it finally went dark. I didn't answer a single one. For the first time in my life, I was going to let everyone else wonder what I knew. The truth was I knew just enough. Not everything, but enough to make them panic. The silence after my message was louder than any argument we'd ever had. That group chat wasn't just about Thanksgiving dinner. It was proof that my entire family had coordinated a plan to keep me away from something far more important than turkey and pie. The phrase "the closing" kept echoing in my mind. No one had mentioned selling the family cabin to me. Not once. That cabin wasn't just another piece of property. My grandfather had poured decades of work into it, and after his health declined, I spent nearly every weekend there helping him keep it standing. I fixed broken steps, hired contractors when the roof leaked, and mailed property tax payments whenever he asked. I believed I was preserving a place that would always belong to the family. Apparently, everyone else had different plans. The more I reread the messages, the clearer the strategy became. They weren't avoiding an awkward conversation. They were making sure I physically couldn't interfere. My father had coordinated who would distract me, who would answer my texts, and who would make sure I arrived long after everyone had finished gathering. Reading it in black and white hurt more than I expected. No one objected. No one said it was unfair. Even relatives I considered close simply replied with thumbs-up emojis or suggestions about timing. I quietly saved every screenshot to 2 different folders, then backed them up online. If anyone tried pretending those messages never existed, they were going to have a difficult time explaining themselves. The phone kept ringing throughout the evening. Eventually the calls stopped. Then the voicemail started. Dad sounded irritated at first, then concerned, then unusually polite. I deleted none of them. I simply listened without responding. Outside, Thanksgiving morning arrived grey and cold. I had barely finished getting dressed when a loud pounding rattled my front door. The pounding came again. Trisha, my father shouted through the door, "Open up, we need to talk." I stood in the hallway without moving. Another knock. Harder this time. "Please," he said, his voice noticeably calmer, "there's been a misunderstanding." I looked through the peephole. Dad stood on my porch with my sister Melissa. She kept checking her phone while Dad shifted impatiently from one foot to the other. My phone buzzed again. A voicemail notification. I pressed play without opening the door. "Trisha," Dad said in the recording, "whatever you think you know, let's just discuss it as a family. Don't make this into something bigger than it is." Something bigger. They had spent an entire day planning to trick me into missing Thanksgiving while arranging a real estate closing behind my back. I let the voicemail end. Neither of them knew I was standing just a few feet away. After another minute of knocking, they finally walked back to their car. I waited until they drove away before letting out a slow breath. The silence inside my house felt strange. Not lonely, just different. For the first time, I wasn't rushing to smooth things over. Instead, I made myself another cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table. My eyes drifted toward an old wooden filing box tucked beneath a bookshelf. I hadn't opened it in years. When I lifted the lid, I immediately recognized my grandfather's handwriting on several folders. One folder had my name written across the front. Inside were papers he had personally handed me years earlier. "Keep these somewhere safe," he'd told me. "I probably won't ever need them," I'd replied. He'd smiled. "You don't get to decide that, just promise me you'll never lose them." At the time, I assumed they were insurance papers or maintenance records. I'd never questioned why he seemed so serious. As I flipped through the documents now, memories surfaced one after another. Every Saturday spent repairing fences together. Every trip to the hardware store. Every winter afternoon splitting firewood, because he insisted the cabin should always be ready for family. When his arthritis got worse, I became the one climbing ladders and meeting contractors. When property taxes came due, he would call me. "Can you mail that payment for me?" I always did. Not because I expected anything in return. Because he asked. Meanwhile, most of the family only visited during holidays. They loved telling stories about the cabin. Very few had helped maintain it. After Grandpa passed away, Dad naturally stepped into the role of organizing family gatherings there. No one questioned it, including me. If someone asked about ownership, Dad would casually answer before changing the subject. "We'll figure all that out eventually." I accepted that answer every time. Looking back, I realized how often those conversations ended abruptly whenever I entered the room. At the time, I assumed they were trying to avoid upsetting me after Grandpa's death. Now it felt different. Calculated. I carefully placed the documents back into the folder. There was one paper I hadn't fully read yet. Instead of opening it, I slipped the entire folder into my bag. If today's appointment was as important as I suspected, I'd rather have every original document with me than risk leaving something behind. My phone rang once more. "Dad." Again. I let it go to voicemail. A few seconds later, another call appeared. This one wasn't from family. The caller ID showed the title company. I answered. "Hello. Good morning, Ms. Trisha." "Yes. This is Karen from Evergreen Title." Her tone was polite but unusually formal. "I'm calling to confirm your appointment this morning." "I'll be there." There was a brief pause before she continued. "Thank you. Before everyone arrives, we need to verify you're still the sole owner." The title company's parking lot was already filling up when I arrived. I recognized my father's truck immediately. Two of my aunts were climbing out of another car, laughing as if they were headed to a holiday lunch instead of a real estate closing. The moment Melissa spotted me, her smile disappeared. "What are you doing here?" she blurted out. Before I could answer, Dad turned around. For a split second, he looked genuinely stunned. Then he recovered. "There you are," he said with forced warmth. "We were just about to call you." "You've been calling me since yesterday," I replied evenly. He ignored the comment. "Come on, let's get this paperwork finished." "Paperwork." He said it as though I were there to watch instead of participate. Inside the office, the buyers sat across the conference table with their real estate agent. A stack of documents waited neatly beside a folder labeled "Closing Package." The closing agent stood as everyone entered. "Good morning," she said. "If everyone could take a seat." Dad confidently walked to the head of the table. "I'm Richard," he announced, extending his hand. "I'll be signing for the property." The closing agent glanced down at her file, then back up. "I'm sorry," she said politely. "Before we begin, I actually need to speak with Ms. Trisha." The room fell quiet. Dad frowned. "There must be some mistake. I just need a moment with Ms. Trisha." She gestured toward the chair beside her. I sat down. Across the table, my father remained standing. "What exactly is this about?" he asked. The closing agent opened a file. "During our final title review, we found a discrepancy that prevents us from proceeding until ownership is verified." Melissa looked at Dad. "What discrepancy?" He answered before the agent could. "It's probably an old filing error." The closing agent didn't respond to him. Instead, she looked at me. "Ms. Trisha, were you able to bring the documents we discussed?" "I did." I removed my grandfather's folder from my bag and slid it across the table. She carefully examined each page. The room was silent except for the sound of paper turning. Finally, she nodded. "Thank you." She reached into another file and placed a certified copy of the recorded deed beside my grandfather's documents. "I can now confirm the records are consistent." Dad leaned forward. "So we are good." The agent met his eyes. "No." She turned the deed so everyone at the table could read it. "The recorded owner of this property is Trisha." Nobody spoke. Dad stared at the page. Melissa blinked several times. One of my aunts whispered, "What?" The agent continued in the same calm voice. "There is no recorded transfer of ownership to anyone else." Dad shook his head. "That can't be right." "It is. My father left that cabin to me. The county records do not reflect that." The buyers exchanged uneasy glances. Their agent quietly closed his notebook. Dad's confidence began to crack. "There has to be another document." The closing agent shook her head. "The deed recorded with the county lists Ms. Trisha as the legal owner." Melissa turned toward me. "You knew." "I knew Grandpa told me never to lose these papers." The room became noticeably tense. One aunt looked at Dad. "You said you handled all of this years ago." "I thought I had." The buyer's agent cleared his throat. "Before we continue, we need to know whether the legal owner intends to sell." Every pair of eyes shifted toward me. I looked at the closing agent. "Before I answer that, there's something else you should see." I unlocked my phone. "I'd like these included in today's record." I handed her the screenshots from the family group chat. She silently read through them. Her expression changed. She looked up at my father. So the legal owner was intentionally excluded from discussions about this sale. No one answered. Melissa looked down at the table. One of my aunts slowly covered her mouth. The buyers exchanged another glance. Their confidence was gone. The lead buyer stood first. "I'm sorry," he said. "We're suspending this purchase until this situation is resolved." His wife rose beside him. "So are we." Without another word, they gathered their folders, thanked the closing agent and walked out of the conference room. The heavy door closed behind them. The conference room stayed silent for several long seconds after the buyers left. Then everything unraveled. Dad pushed his chair back so abruptly it scraped across the floor. "This is ridiculous," he snapped. "They're overreacting." "No," the closing agent replied evenly. "They're responding to unresolved ownership issues and evidence that the legal owner wasn't informed." Melissa looked between Dad and me. "Dad, what is she talking about?" He rubbed both hands over his face. "It's just a paperwork mistake." I finally spoke. "A paperwork mistake doesn't explain why everyone planned Thanksgiving without me." Nobody answered. The closing agent set my phone on the table beside the printed documents. I've reviewed these screenshots, she said. They show discussions about intentionally providing Ms. Trisha with incorrect information so she wouldn't attend. One of my aunts slowly turned toward my father. You told us she already knew. Dad hesitated. I thought she did. No, I said quietly, you made sure I didn't. The room became noticeably more uncomfortable. Emma, my cousin, looked as though she wanted to disappear. I'm so sorry, she said. I honestly added you to the group by accident. I was sending the invite too fast. I didn't even realize what I'd done until after your message showed up. I know, I replied. She lowered her eyes. If I hadn't, none of this would have come out. The closing agent gathered the documents into neat stacks. For everyone's understanding, she said, every signature required to complete this sale belonged to Ms. Trisha. Without her authorization, this transaction could never legally close. Melissa stared at Dad. You knew she had to sign. He hesitated again. I thought we'd work that out. By sending me the wrong Thanksgiving time, I asked. He didn't answer. Another aunt folded her arms. So this whole dinner was just a way to keep Trisha away while you tried to sell the cabin. Dad looked around the room, searching for support. No one came to his defense. I was trying to keep the family together, he muttered. The family, one uncle replied from the back of the room. You left one of us out on purpose. The words landed harder than anyone raising their voice could have. The conversation spilled into the lobby as people stood and drifted out of the conference room. Small groups formed almost immediately. Some relatives questioned Dad. Others quietly apologized to me. Several admitted they'd assumed he had already handled the legal details years ago. I never saw the deed, one aunt confessed. He always said everything had been taken care of. Emma stepped beside me. I should have asked more questions. We all probably should have, I said. Across the lobby, Dad was still insisting the entire situation had been blown out of proportion. It was never supposed to happen like this. Melissa crossed her arms. Then how was it supposed to happen? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. The answer was obvious to everyone standing there. I turned toward the closing agent. I won't be signing anything today. She nodded without hesitation. I'll note that the transaction cannot proceed. With one sentence, the months of planning my family had hidden from me officially came to an end. Dad looked exhausted now. Not angry. Not confident. Just cornered. People who had followed his lead for years were questioning every explanation he offered. The certainty he had carried into the office that morning was gone. As everyone slowly began collecting their belongings, the closing agent held up one final folder. Before anyone leaves, she said, there's one more document everyone needs to hear. The closing agent waited until the room settled again before opening the final folder. This document explains why today's title search produced the results it did. She slid a certified copy onto the table where everyone could see it. The property was legally transferred several years before Mr. Harold's passing. Dad frowned. Transferred to who? She looked directly at me. To Trisha. Nobody spoke. The agent continued reading from the recorded documents. My understanding, based on the attached affidavit and county records, is that Mr. Harold executed and recorded a warranty deed naming Trisha as the sole owner. The transfer was completed while he was alive and mentally competent. She placed another page beside it. This affidavit also explains his reasoning. She read aloud. My granddaughter Trisha has consistently maintained the cabin, paid expenses when needed, and cared for the property without expectation of reward. I am placing ownership in her name to ensure the cabin is protected by the person who has already proven she will protect it. I remembered the afternoon Grandpa handed me that folder. He had smiled when I promised not to lose it. Now I finally understood why that promise had mattered so much. The agent continued. The deed was properly recorded with the county. It has remained valid ever since. Dad leaned back in his chair. I thought the cabin would come to me after he passed. The closing agent shook her head. That could not happen because he no longer owned it at the time of his death. The realization spread across the room. For years, Dad had acted as though he controlled the cabin without ever confirming who legally owned it. Melissa stared at him. So you never checked? He didn't answer. Instead, he looked down at the table. One of my aunts spoke softly. We all believed you. Another relative sighed. And we helped exclude Trisha because of it. Emma walked over to me. I'm sorry for adding you to that group by accident, she said. I managed a small smile. If you hadn't, none of us would know what was happening. She nodded. I've been thinking about that all morning. Melissa finally looked at me. I shouldn't have sent that message about giving you the wrong time. No, I replied, you shouldn't have. There wasn't anything else to say. The screenshots spoke for themselves. No one could honestly claim I had simply misunderstood. The plan had been written out message by message. Keep Trisha away. Finish the closing. Tell her afterward. The buyers formally withdrew from the purchase later that afternoon. Their agent explained they weren't willing to become involved in a family dispute over property ownership. Without a completed sale, there were no proceeds for anyone to divide. Several relatives who had already made financial plans based on the expected sale suddenly had to change them. The cost wasn't just emotional. It became financial as well. Over the following weeks, the family changed. Some relatives stopped speaking to Dad altogether. Others admitted they felt manipulated after realizing they had accepted his version of events without asking questions. Holiday invitations became smaller. Separate gatherings replaced the single celebration we had always shared. No one trusted things to simply work themselves out anymore. As for me, I stopped trying to earn a place at tables where I clearly wasn't wanted. Instead of rushing into another sale, I met with an attorney and a property advisor to understand every option available to me. For the first time, every decision about the cabin was actually mine to make. There was no pressure. No secret meetings. No hidden group chats. Just facts. Months later, Thanksgiving came around again. I unlocked the cabin's front door early that morning. Cold mountain air drifted inside as sunlight reached across the old wooden floor. The place looked exactly the way Grandpa had loved it. A few close friends arrived later with homemade dishes. Emma came too. She hesitated before stepping inside. You sure it's okay? I smiled. I invited you, didn't I? She laughed and the tension disappeared. We spent the afternoon eating, talking, and remembering Grandpa, instead of arguing over what he had left behind. For the first time in years, the cabin felt peaceful. Not because the past had disappeared, but because the truth no longer had to compete with anyone else's version of it. My family thought they could leave me out of Thanksgiving to sell the cabin. They forgot that the one person they excluded was the only person who had the legal right to decide its future.